Hello, lovelies. Welcome to the Fat Joy podcast, where we talk each week about how to flourish in an anti-fat world. I'm Sophia, a fat person and professional coach who loves talking to other fat people about what it's like to live within oppressive systems that marginalize our bodies, and how we still dare to have the audacity and courage to reach towards our collective liberation and embrace our joy. Please know this is an adult content podcast, so there will be swears, we will be talking about harms we've experienced, and we will be rebelling against diet culture, anti-fatness, ableism, racism, etc. If you'd like to support the Fat Joy podcast and get bonus content as a thank you, please check us out at patreon.com/fatjoy. I am so glad you're here with us. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fat Joy podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Apostle, and I'm very excited to have Clarkeisha Kent here with us today. Hi, Clarkeisha.
Hey, how you doing?
So good, so good. So you've just released a book that we are going to talk about. It is called, I love your title, by the way. It is so fun. It is called Fat Off, Fat On, A Big Bitch Manifesto. And I have to say, I just feel like shouting it whenever I see it or hear it. There's so much power in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're going to talk all about it. I'm so glad you're here. I've been following you for a while. And you're such, you're just such a clear voice in the space. And I'm really honored to get to talk to you in person. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, Clarkeisha?
Okay, well, low down dirty is that, I describe myself now as an internet shit talker, but, had lived many, many different lives. Originally from Tennessee, I moved to Chicago for college. That's kind of where I already had writing aspirations, but that's kind of where the film aspirations materialized. So I got my degree in English and cinema media studies. And then, I don't want to say I found the internet, because the internet was always there, and I've always been on the internet actually. But in terms of using it to write, that kind of ramped up when I was in college. I had a blog prior to kind of my college writing, but it really kind of sharpened once I was in college. And then when I left college, I was like, I can do this professionally. Which obviously easier said than done. But kind of my toiling during that time kind of led to now, where, kind of my funny hee hee ha ha things in college became maybe more serious, especially in terms of writing more about things like racism, fat phobia, even politics at the time. And it kind of led me here, because at that point, 2 or 3 years out of college, my agent, shout out to Claire Draper of the Bent Agency, slid into my DMs after a couple years of me, doing the internet shit talking thing. They were like, so do you have an agent? And I'm like, no. So that's kind of when we kind of linked up. And then it's kind of been, since then, it's just me kind of continuing to sharpen my voice, so to speak. But yeah, that's kind of the quick dirty of it all. I've been writing for places like Entertainment Weekly, The Root, Essence, MTV News, HuffPost, if you name it, there's a 50-50 chance I'll run for them already. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. And then, my book, like you mentioned, is out, Fat Off, Fat On, A Big Bitch Manifesto. Took about 2-ish years technically to write and develop, but, probably an idea that was bubbling inside of me for some time now, probably a decade or so. But yeah, that's the quick.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, I love hearing how an agent slid into your DMs. I'm a creative writing coach on the side, so I actually work with a lot of aspiring writers. And what that process you just described would have writers salivating, someone just came to you? That's amazing. And you also had been writing and putting yourself out there and working for it.
Yeah, I was very lucky in that realm, because they turned out to be basically it was a friend of a friend thing that happened. Their colleague had been talking about me, they came up with conversation, and then they, I have my own feelings about her now, Miss Ava DuVernay, lots of feelings. But I will say one thing she was very correct about is the fact that, like, opportunities will come, but the work has to be there, especially if you are marginalized, especially if you're not white, you're fat, you're a woman, we keep going, you're queer. It's going to take a while sometimes, unfairly, for those opportunities to, pop up for you. But it's one of those things where, like, when they do pop up, you need to be ready, because they pop up for real and there's no warning. No one is like, oh yeah, tomorrow you're going to get this random DM from this agent. Nobody's going to tell you that. It's going to happen. So that's the thing. I was prepared for them, because even after they slid in, right, we still got to talk. Still got to show them the rest of my portfolio, that kind of thing. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, the opportunity presented itself, but it's one of those things, if I didn't have shit, right? If I didn't have shit to show for it besides my tweets, even though my tweets are awesome, then, did she get, no one can do anything with that. No one can do anything with that. So, yeah, you got to do the work. And the work sucks, but you got to do the work.
Yeah.
The work sucks ass. That's what they don't tell you. They're like, oh, no, it sucks. It do. It do suck, but
yeah. Because I know I do have a number of writers who listen and people who write. I'm so curious about your writing process. Are you like a ass in chair 2 hours a day? Do you write when it strikes you? Like, what's your process? Because writers love talking about their process, right?
So for the book, it was definitely my ass in the seat for a couple of hours. It's one of those things too. I had to reorient myself to a seat, to a desktop, to a corner, because I feel like sometimes, technology is good in theory when you have no ethics, right? Which is the moment that we're in, because people focused too much on tech and not enough on humanities. But it's a conversation for another day. When that happens, then tech can get really strange and potentially evil. But also, even if we're not talking about that kind of dark stuff, tech has this way of ungrounding you. So for writing, is one of those things where, like, I'm on a laptop right now. I love my laptop. But with the laptop is a temptation to constantly move with it. So I'm going from my room to, I don't know, the bathroom, to the kitchen, to the wherever. And I'm like, there's not any sense of, like, grounding in terms of making sure I can actually write something while I'm on the move. So for me to get my book done, I was like, I'm on this desktop in my room. And from this time to this time, I'm writing. If something came up or I didn't feel like writing at that particular time, I would figure out what other time I can write during that day. Sometimes it'd be early in the day, sometimes it'd be later in the day, because I am a night owl. And I would just sit with myself 2 hours, because if it's under 1 hour, it's probably not going to be enough. But if it's over 2 hours, because I have ADHD, so over 2 hours, I'm going to be burnt out. So I was like, let me go ahead and put this 2 hour mark. Now, in the event that, some idea that's super awesome strikes me and I decide I want to write past the 2 hour mark, that's fine. But, at least hitting that 2 hour mark was kind of my goal. But it would not have happened if I didn't pick a space to, like, write in and stay in. Now, if we're talking about other writing I've done online and et cetera, and some of the other magazines, well, definitely more free flowing. The laptop was in play. I definitely was writing wherever. And at some points, I was also writing on my phone for, like, a while when I was doing like 9 to 5 work. If I was on a break or something or on lunch, I was just going to be on my phone writing the whole thing. I can, put the links and stuff in there later, but, like, writing kind of the meat of my arguments. And then for both processes, I eventually bought a shower notepad. So,
a
shower notepad.
So you get so many aha moments in a shower.
Yeah, exactly. So, you don't have time to, like, leave the shower and go find a pen. No, so I had a shower notepad. And, whenever some idea, either for the book or another article popped up, I would just quickly do a shorthand scribble And then, later come back, grab that little page from the thing, and then get to work. So every time I tell my reference, they're like, that exists. I was like, yes, it actually should have existed for a while. I actually don't know why it's an invention. Because everybody knows that water hits your head, and suddenly you have discovered the key to existence. But people haven't really capitalized on it until like very recently. But I love my shower notepad. I actually have to get a new one because the last one kind of like fell apart with the book because I was doing so much going back and forth with the notes I'd written down. So I got to get a new one, but it's really good. It is water friendly. You just go and just write.
Yeah, it'd be great for in the bath too. Like, I mean, you could have it's so smart. That's so smart. Oh, I love that. And I think it's so fun that you were like, no, I can't have any technology that moves. I must be anchored with a desktop to write this book. There's like a ritual to that, right? Like I will be in this place for 2 hours, set a timer, and like I can't go anywhere. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to be that, get off my lawn, old person or whatever. But tech, I don't know. I feel like it's done weird things to dull kind of our creative senses. And that it kind of makes me nervous sometimes too. As someone who I love tech. If you ask some of my friends and even my parents, I was from a very young age, very tech savvy. I love what we can do with it. I also don't love what we can do with it at the same time. Right. So I worry about that a lot in terms of knowing how to navigate. And also even with the desktop argument, this is a practice I developed from being in libraries, right? So libraries and net good have also been gutted in favor of other things.
I'm a former librarian, yes.
Yeah. So, whenever I can, I'm like, go support your local library. But yeah, I always encourage people to kind of if they can, find ways to do less with tech. At some point I was also in a notebook for my book as well. So it's one of those things where I tell people if they can, don't try not to be over reliant on it. Because you really never know what can happen. Life's very unpredictable. We could wake up one day and I don't know, all the cell phone towers are knocked out. What are we finna do? What are we gonna do? We don't know, So I don't know. I try to tell people if you really can, try to pare down on your reliance on certain tech. But yeah, and again, another conversation.
Yeah, it's so true though. I'm just because we're talking about it, I'm really curious because it's so in the news right now. And I know a lot of people are playing with it, especially writers. How are you feeling about ChatGPT?
I don't. I was like, I don't think it's cute. I don't think it's funny. People are like, oh, there's so much things. I'm like, no. Because at the end of the day, you're feeding your words,
your creativity into this thing.
Yeah, into this machine. It doesn't matter. They'd be like, oh, well, it's fine. I was like, yeah, for now. For now, we know how tech usually goes in, especially the Western world. It always gets weaponized. It always circles back to what weapon can we build to profit from. So I'm actually, I can say no names. I won't be disrespectful, but I'm actually quite irritated with some people in my community who it's not clicking. I'm like, it's very dangerous. I'm also annoyed because I want us to be better at being in solidarity with other creatives. Visual artists, sketch artists, illustrators they've been actually ringing the alarm on this type of tech, this type of AI. And I feel like sometimes writers think that, I don't know, they're better. I don't know where that kind of attitude comes from, but I don't know. There's this attitude that writing won't be touched by this. And I don't know where people are getting that from.
100% it is already. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't like it for a lot of reasons, but I really hate it because, like I said, lack of solidarity with visual artists and visual creatives.
My partner's an illustrator and there's so much already. Illustrators and visual artists have been just what he made 10 years ago versus what he makes now is such a low percentage, like way less than half. And and it's interesting. He was doing some pitches, and so he was like, "Let me just try out ChatGPT." He's a children's book illustrator, so it was kind of like a monster story with kids. And anyway, so what was so interesting though about what came back was that because there was like an allegory to the story, and we were talking about it of like the monster as being other, like capital other, and how do we interact with people who are different than ourselves? And holy smokes, what ChatGPT came back with was like, the monsters are horrible. They're gonna eat. Like, it was there was no, and we even tried, I was like, have it rewrite it with like an anti-oppression or an anti-racist context. We even tried, imagine the monster is actually, this is horrible to say out loud, but we're trying to figure out the system. Like, imagine the monster is a Black man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do we get past what is what's been programmed in by the linguistics? Like, or some kind of minority. We tried different things, like a fat person or someone who's disabled, like trying all these different things to be like, can this algorithm have an awareness of what otherness is? Now, with our experimentation, no, it was very much other is bad. And I was like, oh, I'm very disappointed. Like, that's not okay. So that was kind of my experience with exploring with it as using it for writing.
Yeah. These, tech is still made by man, and man is subject to these oppressions, or again, also doing the oppressing depending on type of man, right? I'm using man in a gender neutral sense. Tech is going to pick up on people's biases and agendas and etc. But yeah, that's all I'll say about that now. But that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So interesting. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about fatness. So what is your relationship to the word fatness? Like, what has your journey been with this word?
So now, I mean, it's been a very long journey, but now for me, it's a descriptor, as like same as small or tall or, skinny, short, everything, right? It's a simple descriptor, technically. Now, people outside of me will ascribe different meanings to it, usually negative meanings. But like I said, I like to be like, it's a descriptor. And if you're adding any extra thing to it that says more about you than me, so that's not my cross to bear. I will say though that I prefer it over things like what's it larger bodied, plus size.
Yeah, higher weight individuals.
Higher weight. I don't like shit like that. I think it's very childish. I think the way that people split hairs on vocab sometimes very childish. For me, I especially don't really. I understand how people feel. I don't like the plus size thing, because in my mind, you are relegating fatness to a respectable other in that context. Because plus size denotes that there is a normal size or a standard size. So there's still othering happening within that terminology. It's the same thing as like, I hate extended sizing. What the fuck is that? Again, implication that there is a standard size that is carried, and then you are the extended size, the extraneous size that they happen to bring in, I guess, for this period, however temporary it's happening. So yeah, for me, it technically is a simple descriptor, but I feel like people's aversion to that word is why I also insist on using it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So do you use straight size for non-fat people or fat, non-fat? Like, what do you?
I just skinny and thin. Skinny and thin. My whole thing is like, now people feel weird about saying it, but I'm like, why do you feel weird? You was very happy about it in the past. Some of y'all be very proud of it. So why are we trying to shift? No, stand your ground, that word, stand 10 toes down, you liked that. So I really don't, when I hear straight size, I bust out laughing. I'd be like, you're not a serious individual. you're not a serious individual. And, I will be polite and just choose not to not to say anything. If it's something that persists, then there will be a conversation had that the other person will not like. But yeah, that straight size shit, I'm just like, okay.
Yeah. Well, now we have mid-size too that's kind of making the rounds, which is the size I think it's around a size 8 to 12-ish now. It's like mid-size. Anyway, I know what we call things can get really complicated. That's why I like fat. To me feels just easy.
Yeah, it's fun. Just fun.
I have to say I am having fun. I was reading Aubrey Gordon's book, and she uses non-fat, and I kind of love it because it's like, well, then that means it, in a way, I guess it's a bit reverse. So maybe it's not great in some senses of it's kind of othering the other person. Whereas I feel like as a fat person, I've always been othered because I've always been the plus size, but now I'm fat. And then there's people who aren't fat. You're the non-fats. But I kind of love, I don't know, it feels like it changes the energy a little bit for me. So I kind of get a tickle out of saying that.
Oh, no, I feel that. The operative word here is still fat, which again, I fuck with. I like that word. Short, sweet, to the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I also, like you, enjoy using it to evoke reactions in people.
Yeah, because other people ascribe these terrible definitions, and I will insist on using that because I don't find them uncomfortable. I was like, if you find them comfortable, then maybe look within. But yeah, I just,
Have you been fat your whole life, or were you different sizes?
So I've been fat my whole life. I will say though, and I talk about in the book, definitely the whole, I don't know if early 2000 people remember yo-yo dieting. They love using that term, but I definitely did that. So in high school in particular, my weight was very, it was unstable, especially them last 2 years. So junior, senior year, I went on a whole little journey. I put in quotations because it was a bad journey. But I went on a journey where I think I dropped 40, 45 pounds in a summer, which, as you know, is not good. But I was determined to be skinny because that was the thing I was supposed to be, right? So high school was definitely a bad time. I got to college and I gained some of it back, which was distressing to me. So then I picked up sports. But I was buff per se, but still on the heavier side. And then I had the ACL injury that happened, also in the book. Y'all can read about that. And gained even more weight. So it was a really tough time. My fat politic was not there. I was not thinking about that. But yeah, eventually I got to a place after leaving a lot of these places, including California, where I was I can't insist on hating my body like this anymore. It's I don't have to be super in love with it every day, every hour, every second. But this thing where I just have this just normal hateful relationship with my body is not great. But yeah, I have been fat all my life, even though, I would say earlier versions of me did not want to be. I'll say that.
Was it kind of gradual, or was there a moment that spurned you to learn about body liberation, fat liberation, that started to create that fat politic that you now live from?
For me, it's weird because it didn't really occur to me to develop that. Because like I said, I've been running from being fat for a while, right? So I would say the politic for me probably started around 2016 onwards. But even the 2016 part was fed because of my ACL injury. So it's one of those things I got really familiar, not only with internalized fat phobia, but also internalized ableism. So it's one of those things where as soon as I was injured and I had to gain, and not had to, but I gained all that weight, right? there was like this kind of like battle in my head about these things. So I would say it technically started 2014, 2015, but 2016 where I really started thinking about these things more seriously. Part of that is due to online spaces, fat liberation spaces. Used to be body positivity. We saw what happened with that. Then people have to be everywhere. So kind of what happened. But that is why, again, I love the word facts, because there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. So now that you put fat back in front of liberation, what you finna do? You can't come over here. Sorry. And that's why vocabulary is really important. But that's also why I'm like, don't split hairs on it. Don't try to be respectable with it. The body positivity movement has a lot of history. People forget it goes back. We're talking about like Black women in like what, the 60s, 70s. So like it precedes all this shit. But that said, like the recent incarnation was definitely Columbus. So it was interesting because my fat politic did start growing then. But yeah, it took off into a different direction when I met a lot of fat advocates and activists online from that 2016 period onward. So that's kind of a little haphazard journey because I went back and forth with it. But yeah.
Did you say it got Columbused?
Yes.
I've not heard that term before. That's brilliant.
It when I use that word, people, the eyebrows go up, and sometimes there's like a shift in the energy. And I'm like, good, because that's what's happening. You are Christopher Columbus, and you're pulling up, and you're killing people, and you're fucking manatees. And like, I want to invoke all that imagery so you understand what has happened here. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Had you heard that, or did you create that?
I don't, so it's interesting because like, unless it's one of these tests or something, I sometimes hesitate to be like, I created something. Because you never know if you like just heard someone random on the street say it and it just happened to like stick, right? So I DK about if I created it, but I will say that, in the very least, I'm an early adopter. So, usually I'll go look at tweets and see maybe how far back I used it. We don't know. But I'll say in the very least, there's someone else out there who used it before me. I will say early adoptee. Maybe I popularized it. Sometimes I don't say that, but I can't.
Yeah. That's such a great term. Thank you for sharing that with us. So let's talk about the book a little further. So I grabbed a quote from your website, which I thought was so great. First of all, on your website, it says you are a culture critic and bringer of chaos at your service. And I just love that, a bringer of chaos. And then you've also described yourself as an internet shit talker, which both are just fantastic. So from your website, the quote I grabbed was that this book explores your own lived experience to illuminate how fat phobia intertwines with other oppressions. It stresses the importance of addressing the violence scored upon our minds and our bodies, and how we might begin the difficult but joyful work of setting ourselves free. That's a big hell yes. Yes, please. That's amazing. So how did you know it was time to write this book?
That actually goes back to my agent once again. Like, I've always had these stories within me, right? But, once I started talking to my agent and, we signed up paperwork and made it formal, right? I went back to them because they're like, okay, so what's the plan? What do we want to, what we want to pitch to these publishers and stuff? So I actually had a Western first that I started working on, again, back in 2015 when I was still in college. It's still cooking. I got to do hella research. So I had to put that down for a second because, you can't half-ass research. But I wanted to work on it. And I did want that technically to be my first project. But my agent was like, all right, I like the idea. But consider, so they pitched a memoir to me. And it's one of those things where like they pitched it because they were like, a genre like the Western, is niche. Hate that word, but it's niche. And there has to be name recognition going into that process if you want to succeed. So they're like, how about we do this first? Get your feet wet publishing, get your name out there. And then, you can come back and be like, okay, let me write this project that I really want to write, but now you have more clout, more money, more resources behind you. So that's kind of how that happened.
And again, I work with a lot of life stories, memoir writers, and there's often a point where it's almost like there's a real tenderness and a rawness that comes up as you kind of go back and excavate. And then everyone has different ways of kind of moving through that. Were there moments like that for you as you were kind of digging deeper into your past?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, there were some moments. There were like really good moments, really bad moments. I was lucky during the process at the time to have access to a psychiatrist and psychologist. So it's one of those things where, like, if something, sad or traumatic resurface, then I would just be like, okay, yes, I'm done with that chapter for the day. And I would call up my psychologist or psychiatrist and I'd be like, so you need room on your schedule this week?
Yeah, because you don't want to re-traumatize,
Yeah.
And there's a real risk of that with memoir.
Yes. So, I definitely advise anyone who's like interested in diving into memoir to have that type of help on deck, because it's it's an extreme sport. Yeah, it's an extreme sport, writing memoir. But it's also because the genre demands a lot of you, and you have to be ready for that. That's why when the genre, like when the memoir is not as well written, you can really tell, because the author phoned it in. So yeah, the memoir demands a kind of a naked honesty that is not required of you from, say, a biography or even an autobiography, right? There's still some like distance there. Memoir, not so much. So
no, yeah. And I love that in the quote that I read, it talked about, this work of setting ourselves free. So I don't know if this is a cheesy question or not, but it's in my mind. So I'm going to ask it. And that is, so how did writing this book set you free?
It definitely put to bed a lot of stuff for me. I would say first and foremost, it connected some dots.
Like the act of writing it was able to like reflect and connect dots. Oh, that's great.
I process by writing. I always have. Like I could, for example, let's say you're in my head and you see idea A and B next to each other. You, as the outsider, these things are connected. My brain is like, okay, they next to each other, so what? But let's say I start writing, and then the synapses, they start firing with each other, because now my writing has made the connection, helping make the connection. So that's kind of what happened, especially writing about my family. Writing it, like seeing it on paper, made everything make sense. Like, doesn't justify what happened to me or like, that family in general, but it's one of those things where, like, now that I see it on paper, I see how we got here. And that's really important, because for a lot of our problems, they start in childhood. They start right there, and we spend all of childhood trying to figure out what the fuck happened.
And into adulthood for many of us.
Yeah. So, it's important for me to see it on paper. And then I think other than that too, I would say that I'm very spiritual. And something that I do that I've done in the past is, like, if I'm trying to like let something go, I'll write about it. I'll like bullet over my brain. I'll talk to whoever about it, and then like I'll put on down on paper, and then I will burn that shit, and then like
literally burn it.
Yeah, and then symbolically release it. So that's kind of how I view the process of writing this down. I was like, okay, so I'm getting it on paper. We're gonna leave it there, and we're gonna send it out and send it away from me. Yeah, it's a very interesting process because, yeah, just writing it kind of pulled out some of the stuff that I had like put away in the attic of my brain, right? So I had, I had to dig those boxes out. I had to start packing. Sometimes it wasn't pretty, but it was good to like, again, get it out of my brain and kind of like finally put it to rest.
Yeah. Oh, it's so powerful. And like out of your body, because our body holds so much, right? So, yeah, that process of just bringing it up and then being able to let it go. I love that you actually like lit it on fire. That's perfect. It's such a great analogy of like, this is ephemeral. This gets to just kind of float away. Like, and I am left, yeah, where I want to be a choice. Yeah, that's beautiful, Clarkeisha. Cool. You mentioned that you have faith. You have a faith. And one of the things that we talked about exploring in our conversation was this idea of purity culture and fatness. So I'm fascinated. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I will have to look up like the proper definition of purity culture because I'm not as sophisticated as Webster's or Free Dictionary or whoever. I'm on Oxford. We can keep going. But I would say, if I were to sum up in my own words, purity culture is dominant, white, Christian, heterosexual, a cult, I would say, like a cult of thought, especially that is designed to control the bodies of, women primarily, or those who don't fall under what is considered straight or heterosexual. And it also relies on racial stratification too. Because if you know anything about the history of Black people and how our bodies have been exploited, then you will know that our bodies are not seen as pure, right? So if you're a Black person, you're existing under this cult of purity culture, it is doubly worse, instantly, doubly worse. And I talked about that a little bit in my book. But that would be kind of the summation. It's designed to control and cater to a quite literal patriarchal mindset because it sets up God as the father, even though God is supposed to be genderless. But again, another conversation. Right. So that's what I would say, like the quick dirty of purity culture. But the reason I talked about fatness with it is because fatness deviates from the white supremacist norm. If we're thinking about wasps, right? Like think about wasps. Do you see fat wasps? Like, not really. If you're seeing like a white waspy person, they're usually thin, right? So that's another thing. So I'm
just going to jump in case people don't know what WASP is. It's White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which is, yeah, kind of the culture within patriarchy.
When we're talking about fatness and purity culture, I thought it was important to talk about it because if you're thinking about how fatness especially works, if we're thinking about let's say like sinning, deadly sins, we know that gluttony and sloth are among them, right? So if we're thinking about religious context of fat phobia, religious people too will sign off on using fat phobia as a weapon because they have the whole gluttonous sloth thing to fall back on. So they can like shame you into submission and be like, oh, well, you're not pure because not only you're a woman or you're queer or you're Black or whatever, but you're fat. So that means you're gluttonous and you're greedy and you're not smart and you're lazy. Like they can, just start really just diving into like denigrating you because of that religious context. So I was like, I think I would have been doing a disservice to not talk about that in terms of purity culture for discussing like women. But on top of that, if we're talking about particularly Black women and or women of color, right? We tend to get sexualized way more when we are fat. Because as you know, For people who covet like the big titties, the big ass or whatever, oftentimes all of those things come with a fat stomach, right? So, when you're younger, I know when I was younger, I think I was between ages of 12 and 14 is when I really started like developing. And that's also when problems started with specifically my mom, which I'm sure a lot of fat girls can relate to, that really weird relationship with your mom, especially if she's either like as fat as you or like much skinnier, right? So there's usually those two forces at work. But yeah, because I was fatter, I looked more developed than some of my peers. So that also drew some additional hostility within the church. So that's another aspect that people forget about too, the way that fatness will elicit certain reactions from people, including sexual. That is not fair to us, obviously. But that is what happens. So I was like, it would be very much an oversight to leave out how fat phobia plays into purity culture, into white supremacist culture. Because it is white supremacist culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting. The piece around how bodies get sexualized and then demonized for being sexualized, like it's very, there's kind of it ends up to me always feeling like a no-win for fat people.
It isn't a no-win situation. It is absolutely no-win situation.
And it also really pisses me off. Keisha, I just like, yeah.
Same.
I grew up Greek Orthodox, which is a type of Christianity, and I as soon as, it's so interesting, as soon as you said the words gluttony and slothfulness, it took me right back to when I was a kid in Sunday school and these things were being talked about. And I remember like that feeling of shame of, oh, they're talking about me. I need to burn something right now. Oh my gosh. I have this podcast, I have these conversations to really dive deep into these issues, to raise awareness, because I have both fat and non-fat listeners. And for the fat people, I often think about this is like a time when people can be like, oh, thank God I'm not alone. And for the non-fat people, I think I'm hoping, and what I hear they write me is like, wow, I didn't realize, never thought about this. Thank you. So like when it comes to this purity culture piece, like what do you want people to know? What can we think about, deepen? How do we start to unravel? Because this is like really deep in us. How do we start to unravel it for ourselves? What would you suggest?
People aren't going to want to hear this, especially if they're more religious, but it's one of those things where like there will have to be at some point like a mass divestment away from Christianity. I don't care how it makes people feel, but that is like the source of a lot of what feeds into that beast. Not to say that if, Christianity disappeared overnight, we would be okay. No, we still have to deprogram, and that's the reality, right? But for me, yeah, it would have to be a massive like exodus from that particular faith and some of these other faiths too. But again, another conversation. If we're on the other side of that, and we're talking about this fat phobia's role in particular, dealing with fat phobia would require a lot more self-awareness from people, even fat people, and a more rigorous fat politic. And when I say rigorous, I'm meaning that people need to zone in on those intersections. Lots of people, even though resources are abundant, lots of people don't know that, at the crux of anti-fat bias and fat phobia is racism and anti-Blackness. That line of demarcation emerged way back. I would recommend people read Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. She talks about how fat phobia emerged, at least in these, in the Western world, from that contact that happened between Europeans and, Africans. Fat phobia used to be, like if you're fat, you're rich, you're well fed, you're of a certain class, a certain high class, right? They get in contact with Africans, they see that Africans are also, plump and curvy and whatever, and they decide that, hey, we don't want to look like them because we don't want to be grouped in with them. So then, these racial categories start to pop up like, okay, I'm white, therefore I'm thin and I'm smart and I'm wise and I'm enlightened. And this other person is black and they're fat. That means they're lazy, right? Unintelligent, sloppy. They love using that one for a sloppy. So that's literally how these things emerged. So when particularly a fat white person decides they don't want to do any deeper analysis where race is concerned, it's very much ignorant to me. It's given an oversight because you're erasing kind of the crucial crux of the fat phobia. In addition to that, I feel like people also people should also keep in mind that fat phobia is a system of oppression, not just about name calling. That's a very elementary understanding of fat phobia. And when I say it intertwines with so many things, I really mean that. Especially, let's say, disability. When we're talking about healthcare, people forget that, obesity is considered a disease, disease. And that's also why I've been disappointed with some fat writers, especially that Guardian piece that just came out. A whiff of fat phobia in the air, like it hasn't been here. But yeah, I get irritated with some writers because they don't link fat phobia with ableism, even though the connection is right there. Even though that they worked in tandem during the pandemic, because people were afraid of getting fat, even though COVID will literally take your circulatory system and play jump rope with it. But because companies, these diet and fitness companies, preyed on the very childish fear, it is childish. And I'll say that someone who went to that fear, right? Very childish fear of getting fat. We had fat phobia and ableism joining hands so that, people were risking their lives to go to the gym to keep off this COVID 15 pounds that people were, talking about. So, when we talk about dismantling these things, you need to actually understand what's at stake and what's going on. I feel like people in general, again, even other fat people, have very, very, very surface understanding of fat phobia. And for us to be even close to having conversations about eradicating it, you have to know the history. You have to know its reach. You have to know what it looks like in different contexts, because like any source of oppression, it is always ready to evolve, to transform, to hide itself, to unhide itself. Shit is very complex.
And sophisticated. Like
Yes.
These oppressive systems are sophisticated.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So it's gonna require deeper level analysis that a lot of people aren't ready for. Fat phobia is, not to say other oppressions aren't acceptable in certain parts of the world, even here in the States, but fat phobia is one of those things where like a lot of people agree on it, even other marginalized people. And when you point that out, people get really defensive. I'm like, no, it is normalized to a lot of y'all, even people who would call themselves very progressive. I remember the other day I got into it with a couple of people. I blocked them because I'm not going to go back and forth with anybody. And these people aren't going to beat my ass either. So, but someone had tweeted like, okay, what opinion would get you? I think it was that Flynn, that Flynn meme where like he's posted up, he's crossing his arms, and it's like 25 million swords pointed at his face, right? And they're like, oh, what opinion would get you like in this type of situation with leftist people, right? as some people know, I hate online leftists, but even if I'm not thinking about my hatred of them, I had commented, I was like, being a fat phobic leftist is like brainless behavior. Like, you have nothing but a tin can up there as far as I'm concerned, because if you're someone who cares about the future of healthcare, you want free healthcare, you want universal healthcare, you need to care about fat phobia, because fat phobia diminishes the quality of care for everybody. For everybody. For everybody. Doctors fucking phoning it in because they're fucking fat phobic. Like, I don't think people understand. Doctors are not properly doing their job because they're fat phobic, because they're racist, because they're ableist. Like, we can keep going, right? And like, I've heard horror stories for all sorts of people who are either thin or fat, or, you know, or swapped, or formerly fat, doesn't matter, formerly skinny. And, you know, it's always, you know, I went to this doctor for this serious issue, and they're like, oh, lose this weight. Turns out I had like stage 15 cancer.
I know.
Like,
honestly,
so,
I know.
You know, I just,
yeah.
I don't know. It bothers me. It bothers me because
it's very frustrating. I know I interviewed a doctor the other day, and they were like, look, what I want people to know is that doctors are your enemy if you're fat or marginalized. Like, just know walking in that that's what you're walking into. And it's unconscious. They've been trained this way. A lot of them aren't doing deeper work. I think the other part for me that I think is really interesting about what you said, especially around, like, you know, leftists, is I'm always surprised. I don't know why I'm still surprised, Clarkeisha. You think I would not be surprised by anything anymore, but I'm still always surprised when I'm talking to someone who's like a DEI expert and is in like an anti-oppression educator, and then I bring up sizeism as, like, you always see like the fat person in the training. I'm like, and what about fat people? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, they haven't thought about anti-fatness as part of, and then I bring up and I said, oh, well, have you heard of Sabrina Strings? And this is the book, and anti-fatness is rooted in racism, and here's the history. And they're still like, they're spinning. They've never connected. Like, this is where I feel like, you know, the diet and wellness industrial complex, the kind of the way diet culture has been structured by capitalism, like, has just been so sophisticated.
it's been very successful.
So successful, right? Oh, yeah. And I never know what to do, because I just want to like scream and be like, open your damn eyes and brain. And like, this is not hard. This is not a big leap, but it's really hard for people. So I will link to Sabrina Strings' book. I'll also link to Deshaun Harrison's book, who I always link to. Is it Harris or Harrison? Harrison, right? Belly of the Beast. I link to them a lot, just because, again, like, I think it is so helpful for people to understand the origins of where a lot of this comes from. And I don't know, this is probably not a great thing to say, but I'll say it. But it's almost like linking fatness with racism somehow gives like clout to fatness. Have you ever felt that? It's like, if I say it's tied to racism, then some people will take it more seriously who...
I don't necessarily agree, because there's some people who don't take racism seriously, period. So it's one of those things, like, you tie them together, they're gonna be like, oh, I need to really ignore this now. So yeah, I just, you know, those two things obviously fall into the undesirable category. So the people who already don't want to engage with one definitely won't engage if the other is brought up as well. So I think you have to just be prepared for ignorance and pushback regardless. But you know, but in a way, if you are talking to someone who does present themselves as being very anti-racist, then, you know, then bringing up the origins of fat phobia will, you know, maybe that might go over well with them. I don't know, but it's very complex, and people are very racist and fat phobic and have been so for a long time. So so, you know, sometimes making the connection works, sometimes it doesn't. It really just depends on the person that you're addressing.
Yeah. And we haven't even talked about queerness yet.
No, yeah.
Which is a whole other layer to add in.
Yeah.
I imagine that comes up quite a bit in your book. Do you write about that as well?
I did. Yeah, I wrote about being bisexual and also being demisexual. Because demisexual is on the ace/aro spectrum, but doesn't get talked about as much. So I was like, let me just go ahead and put this in here. Y'all have questions, y'all can look this shit up. If I feel comfortable, I'll discuss it more. But yeah, so definitely talking about being queer and also how that complicates things like purity culture and fat phobia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, beautiful. I'm very excited to read the book. I hope it arrives soon. I was hoping to read it before we talked, but I know it's on the way, and I'm so excited to dive in and get all those details. So one thing before we go, we wanted to talk about the Kelly and Kat test. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So Kelly and Kat test we released back in February. It was me and my colleague, Sydney Sky G. They are inflammatory fat on Twitter right now, and I believe some variation of Sydney Sky G on Instagram. Very, 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 very brilliant fat liberation advocate. They regularly shake the table. I appreciate them a lot because they will go where the standard fat person might not because of the backlash. Recently, they made the connection between shapewear and fat phobia, and a lot of people weren't happy because their fave right now is pushing shapewear. But we go again. I'm not gonna get into that, but people know what I'm talking about right now. But yeah, me and them collaborating on the test. It actually was in the works for about a year at least, because we started. When the second season of Euphoria came out and we saw Kat Hernandez's treatment, fat character on the show, because her first season arc I thought was very strong. I wrote about it at one point, and then her arc just evaporated in season 2 because of some behind the scenes things, allegedly. I got put allegedly there always. But yeah, after stuff like that, and then for Sid, after kind of observing the treatment of Kelly in Insecure, how like Kelly never really had arc like that, like some of these other characters. After observing both of them, we were like, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Because it's one thing to talk about fat phobia at length through our articles or through our tweets. But it's another thing to, again, like I always say, put it down on paper. I remember when I made the Kent test, and people started coming up, professors and teachers, like, yeah, I just put it into my curriculum because I was like, wow, I can't believe we weren't doing this before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now you have people really kind of looking at the kind of I don't want to say representation, but like the kind of bias that is at play in some of these media representations of Black women or women of color, right? So me and Sid wanted to do the same thing for fat people because we was tired of going in circles about the kind of fat phobic tropes we kept seeing. Like, I don't like repeating myself. So I was like, I'm going to put it on paper so you can see it and we don't have to go back and forth like this because I'm not going back and forth. You just read the paper. So that's kind of what we decided. We're like, when you put it on paper, it's harder to pretend that it does not exist. So that was kind of our goal with it. Similar to the Kent test, it has a certain amount of criteria. You can go up to about 12 points. So 0 to 12. And let me see. So it has about 1, 2, 3, 4. See. Hold on, I'm scrolling right now. Just make sure I can count.
Yeah, and I'll put. There's a really great a link with the PDF of the whole Kelly and Kat test criteria. I'll include that.
So it's about 3. I would say like 3 prompts or list of criteria. The very first one mentions the fat suit, and it mentions that if there's a fat suit involved, don't even finish the rest of the test.
It's a 0.
It's disqualified. Yes, disqualified. Disqualified. I actually, side note, I can't wait for Sid's book, because they're cooking one up, and they will also be talking about the fat suit and its origins being blackface. I know a lot of people not prepared for that one, but Sid's about to shake the table, so I can't wait for that. But yeah, we were like, fat suit, 0. Then, obviously I'll let your audience kind of read the test, but if I'm going down the line, we talk about character arcs. We talked about fat people not being supporting characters or accessories to thinner main characters, lighter skinned main characters, because we talked about colorism briefly as well in the test. We also talked about the weird words that people use for fat, including, let's say, husky, big boned, voluptuous, curvy, fluffy, husky, plus size, thick. Any type of those words, we were like, y'all need to be careful with that. And then we had common fatphobic or color tropes, which we list them in the test, so y'all can go ahead and look at that. But it was a couple. So then after that we had romantic interests. I know people are, we kind of went back and forth between me and Sid about whether we want to include this, but we're like, no, we're going to include it. We'll put an asterisk there and mention that, like, obviously it has to be relevant to the plot. But it's one of those things where, like, if these type of like relationships or relationship configurations exist in this particular piece of media, and you've kind of went out of your way to make sure that the fat character cannot participate, yeah, I'm gonna have some questions. Like, unless they come out and be like, I'm not interested in that, or I don't know, maybe I'm Ace or Arrow or something, and that's not of concern, that's fine. But like, if you've made a point where this media discusses these type of relationships, and we look over and the fat person is not nothing happening over there, we're gonna have some questions, right? So we had mentioned something like that. We talked about interactions with other fat people. Like, there's always this tokenization, right? I hate tokenization of the marginalized character in what is usually the overwhelming norm. So if you have a piece of media where it's mostly thin people, sometimes we'll slip the random fat person in there so they can't be called fatphobic. If you have the majority white cast, sometimes we'll slip the random Black person, Asian person, whoever there, so they can't be called racist. So we put that rule in there to be like, hey, stay away from tokens if you can, but say, because it's not cute. It also cheapens your writing, but some people don't care. So we've talked about fetishization in that way, where me and you were discussing like the sexualization of fat people. Then we mentioned no hyperfixations on food and exercise. They love to do that to us. Sydney brought up a great point actually about the marathon storyline that they love to give us. It actually ironically came up near the end of Insecure. And when they told me, I was like, that's crazy. I thought we were like past this point, but apparently not. But yeah, they always try to give us a good marathon storyline. And we know what that's for and who that's for, but we usually pretend we don't know. So we wanted to put that in there. And then we had mentioned adequate access to styling. Just like that that sloppy thing me and you discussed. I hate that. They like to put us in whatever. And part of that is also fed by the fact that, again, it's completely normal for a lot of these stores to just not carry our sizes. So there's a lot at play here, but we're like, if you give a fuck, find a budget and make sure that your fat actress, actor, whoever is properly styled. Because if you have all your thin characters dressed to the nines and then your fat character is not giving that, yeah, I'm gonna have some questions. So there was that, and then we had supportive parental figure. Again, I and Sid were like, it helps to have someone on the screen who's not antagonistic towards this person. If it's a parent, then all the more better. And then after that, we had a specific criteria for dialogue, which was directly born out of what happened to Kat in that season of Euphoria. I'm not going to lie to you. I went back and did like kind of the math on how much time she had to speak for real throughout that whole season. And it was kind of ugly. Like, I think it was barely, either we hit 60 minutes or it's barely 60, or barely over. And it's one of those things where like, y'all really cut down her dialogue this much. Like, that's crazy. There's actually a scene, if people who watch Euphoria, or if you're interested, right? If you go back to Euphoria, there's a scene where, what's the character's name? What's her name? Oh my God. There's Cassie, the white girl character who's, kind of girl next door, but slutty too, that whole thing. So there was her, and then I can't, Maddie? Yes, Maddie. Very, she's very bold. She's very self-possessed. She can be a little mean. I'm not gonna hold you to be a little mean. She's Latinx. She had a very toxic ex who then comes into the conversation between her and Cassie, and there's like some bad blood there. I can't really spoil everything, but Kat, that character, is trying to calm Maddie down at some point, and you can't even hear what she's saying. Like, her mouth is moving, but I don't hear no sound.
It's a weird kind of like erasure.
It was the way that she was treated during that second season was wild. I was like, y'all really not gonna let her talk? Like what? So yeah, we put that rule in there. And obviously there's specific rules, like, or time measurements within the rule. So we said 5 to 10 minutes in a 30-minute episode. Then we had 10 to 15 in a 60-minute. And then we had like a fourth of the total runtime of the film. Obviously very arbitrary, technically. But I was like, I'm going to put it there. I mean, Sid are going to put it there because apparently y'all need y'all hands held throughout this process. So here you go. But yeah, I was bewildered. I was like, yeah, this is where I get off too. So
I love that you put this together. I'm even thinking about, again, I just think about the writers I work with who, we're always talking about how to not create stereotypes. And if you're writing lived experience that is not your own, there's a responsibility I think there's a responsibility to do some research so you're not just perpetuating.
Yeah, there is. People feel away when you say that, but there is. Media in this country, all of it, even good media, has a bent to it. There's always some message, sometimes some very bad propaganda at play. And you just have to be aware. You have to consume things with a critical eye. I don't really care what you say. Now, there can be things that you do watch for fun, for personal enjoyment, but I think people need to understand that, like, everything has a bias to it. Even if you're not aware of it, that doesn't change anything. It's still present.
So true. Yeah, it's a great resource. I'm so glad you created it. You and Sid created it. It's amazing. I'll link to it. Anyone who's curious about evaluating your favorite shows or books. I often think of the movie. I don't know if you've seen the movie Finding Figaro.
No, not that one. No.
Yeah, because I'm always like, where's like the good show movie where fatness is represented in a way that is not problematic. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking about that movie. And I think it's pretty good. It would be high up there. There were a few things where it didn't quite do it. But I don't know, my impression, I'm curious if you think this too, is that there's not a lot out there that would get really high scores. Yeah. I'm trying to think of.
I will say though, if I love Queen Latifah and I like a lot of her rom-coms, I think those would score very high. They scored very high on the Kent test. I think they would score very high on the Kelly and Kat test. Obviously, you have to actually measure it, but I definitely appreciate her because if you look at her earlier rom-coms, there's some fat politic there. I think it was unbeknownst to her. She talks about later where thinking about vocab and these other things, might not have occurred to her. But, she was very aware as a Black woman who was larger that, her body was still policed. She went into some anecdote about being on, living single. And even though it's a very successful show, her and I want to say Erica Alexander, don't quote me in that last part, but at least in the very least her, there were like producers and the powers that be, around that show saying that they should lose weight and stuff. And she was like, what the fuck? So she's dealt with stuff like that in the industry. So it's one of those things even if she was not openly talking about fatness, it's still present in her work. I think one of my favorite examples of that, one is Beauty Shop and the other is Just Right. Beauty Shop, classic, Black classic, love it. But in there, I love what she does with kind of poking fun at very old fat stereotypes, especially from late 90s, early 2000s. So one really good example is that there's a scene where before she goes into goes into work, as a hairstylist, she's at home, she's getting ready, she's putting on her pants. Her daughter comes in and she's asking her hey, these pants make my butt look big? And we all know what that means if we studied media and fatness, right? And her daughter's like, yeah. And she's like, good.
Good. Yeah.
There you go.
That's right.
I was like, very quick, very quick nod to it. But if you're aware of where that trope comes from, then you understand what's happening there, especially as a Black woman, right? So that's number one. Number two, I don't want to, I'm not sure. Well, I think people should watch the movie. It's very cute. But in that movie, Just Right, there's a lot at play with her character, her character's mother, who's played by Pam Grier, shout out, and then the character's cousin, who is thinner and lighter skinned. There's a lot that goes on. Most of it's not explicitly said in the film, and I think for a very good reason. I think it's something that you need to be able to intuit, right? But there's this speech that she, gives not just her parents at one point, but the love interest who ends up getting caught up with that kind of those two, that kind of those contrasting love interests, right? But she talks about not wanting to be the homegirl, right? Wanting to be the actual romantic interest, not just someone that you chill with, or you come to when you're sad, when you're sad and you need comfort, right? So she has a whole thing where she talks about that. She doesn't mention being fat once, but I don't think she needed to, because if you fat, you just know you've been through something like that where someone was trying to put you in a box, in an interpersonal relationship, even if it wasn't romantic, right? Try to put you in a box as their comfort toy, and that's all you're there for,
Yeah, you're not out in public with them, but they'll come to you when they need something. Yeah.
A lot of her movies do stuff like that. She don't have to come out and say it. She is illustrating the problem and the frustration that a lot of us fat people face. So I think her movies would do pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for recommending both of those. I feel like I've seen them, but I don't not in years. These are older movies, right? Like you said.
Yeah, we're giving so Beauty Shop definitely early 2000s. Early. I want to say it was 2004, 2006. I got to go back and look. Just Right came out in 2010. That one's a little further back too. But yeah, I love her as a romantic interest, romantic heroine. I hope that she does more. If I see her in public, I'm gonna be like, I need more rom-coms.
Well, the one I'm thinking of is, was it called Last Holiday?
Last Holiday is the Queen Latifah rom-com. I love that movie. It was actually, people don't remember, it was actually a remake. And I don't remember the exact verbiage in the Roger Ebert review that came out for the film, but he was basically like, I don't even care as a remake. It was made much more like magical, excuse me, by its inclusion, of Queen Latifah, because she herself is very, just an effervescent human being. And yeah, the movie's great. It does tap into those things that I mentioned. Like it just I advise people watch it, but if you're watching it with a critical eye, the movie also once again kind of highlights some of that, anti-fat bias or even internalized bias too. Because there's this really important scene where she's a great cook. She loves food, understands how special food is, right? And she ends up cooking this delicious meal for her neighbor, a younger Black kid. And she doesn't partake in that meal. She gives him the food, and then she takes out one of those microwavable foods.
Yeah, like a lean cuisine or something.
Yeah, lean cuisine, healthy choice. And I remember looking at that look at these writers. Yeah, look at these writers not saying the thing, but also saying the thing. They need to tell us that, there was something going on with her. But they showed us, which is important for visual medium. So it's just stuff like that where I'm where she's in the movie, and again, the thing gets indirectly addressed. And I do actually appreciate that, because, sometimes if you come out with it, people will get defensive and they won't engage. But, but if you slide it in there, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, you kind of carry them along with the story, and then that can work its magic. Yeah, totally.
I would actually recommend, on that note, Bell Hooks tackles discussing fat phobia in a similar way in her book about, what's it called? Communion, The Search for Female Love. I recommend everybody go read that one too. And in the book, there's a chapter where it's called, I think, Growing into a Woman's Body and Loving It. And she talks about fat phobia. She never mentions the word once, because I looked, but she talks about fat phobia. She uses the entry point of eating disorders, and how they appear as the result of this kind of white supremacist obsession with thinness, and how thinness is weaponized against women to control us, to keep us small, quite literally, keep us small.
Small and starving.
Yes, she talks about it. She talks about her own struggles with disordered eating. She goes on for quite a bit in that chapter about it. And I actually respect her for doing that, because imagine you read that chapter and you're talking to someone about it. Maybe they're talking to you or me and they're like, yeah, she's talking about fat phobia. And then you're like, oh my God. But, Belle got them there by just literally describing the thing. And she also calls out feminists too for it, where they're she's disordered eating in particular is too much of a problem for us to not have addressed this yet, So she uses that entry point, but she's talking about fat phobia. Everyone should go read that chapter, because she goes on and she talks about fat phobia in parenting, what happens with husbands and wives and their children. She went in, and I'm I was just amazed, because she doesn't say fat or fat phobia once. Maybe fat, because she was talking about getting older and gain that weight gain that happens when you get older. She mentions that, but she does not say fat phobia once. And I was like, this actually was quite, usually I'm a stickler for vocab. I'm a stickler for naming things. So I'm a writer, that's what I do. But I was like, actually, Belle, the act of you not saying this was actually quite effective. So yeah, I'd recommend that too. Sometimes subtext is important. Sometimes. I think most of the time it is a coward's game, but sometimes it is effective.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I'll link to that as well. All right, Clarkeisha, we're coming to the final question, which is about joy. So what's your relationship to joy? How do you choose it? Do you believe it's something we can choose? How do you feel about joy?
I think it's both a feeling and a choice. I think it did what its form, the form that it takes depends on the day, depends on the person. My relationship to joy is, it's complex. It's complex because I've seen a lot of really ugly, terrible things. And sometimes those things weigh on me and I'm like, what the fuck is joy? On a particularly dark day. But on a day like this, I would say that I think I have a relationship with joy that is still kind of in its infancy. And what I mean by that is that younger versions of me did not think that joy was a thing I could experience for obvious reasons why we're here on the podcast, right? But now that I'm older, now that I've developed a stronger fat politic, I'm trying to kind of reestablish my relationship with joy and happiness. So, I'm not quite there yet. It's something I've literally been rebuilding, especially through the pandemic. It's a very terrible time for a lot of us. So yeah, I would say that my relationship with joy is still very young because I had to start over. I did not think joy was a thing I could, have as a fat person. So I've been having to rewrite that narrative for myself.
And on a day like today, what does bring you joy? Is there a thing
what brings me joy? So what brings me joy? I'm not gonna lie to you, movies, but particularly as a subset of movies. Either I like certain comedies, especially like Will Ferrell is like making an appearance. Like I think he's so fucking funny. I'm actually like every day, like he's getting older and it's scaring me. Like I know time is a thing, but I'm like, oh my god, like I can't. I love comedies, but I also love horror. Oh my god, like I love a good horror movie. Like I'll be scared shitless out of my mind, but I'll be having a blast. Because I just think horror movies are much smarter than people give them credit for. And I think you really have to know your shit as a writer to be able to write a good horror and a good comedy. So I enjoy the shit out of those genres, and they do bring me joy because for me it's like I'm enjoying it purely because it's like part of this art form, but I'm also enjoying it because the person that made it / wrote it was also clearly enjoying what they were doing. That's why it's this good. So I love that. I have the joy of like just watching something that you've never watched before, and it's just so good. And then just also sits with you and it resonates. And like even if let's say I'm not a zombie, I'm not a monster, I'm not no oogie boogie, like I'm not none of those things. But you look at these stories and sometimes you can relate, like you mentioned, to the monster. You can relate to the entity that is maybe terrorizing our heroes because, maybe you did them wrong. It's sometimes like that. So I really derive a lot of joy from watching these things because, it requires so much creativity, but also so much commitment to finishing a story. A bunch of us, including myself, I have like a bajillion stories in my Dropbox that are not done. So I really do get joy from seeing people bringing these amazing, but also terrifying, terrifying stories to screen.
That was a good slip. Bringing it to Scream. Oh, beautiful. I also am a big fan. Like, I always joke my hobby is watching great TV and great movies. With all the streaming services now, it's like there's never a shortage. And it also brings me great joy. This has been a wonderful conversation, Clarkeisha. I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so excited to link to all the things we've talked about. And yeah, everyone listening, read the book, get the book, follow Clarkeisha on all the places. I'm so glad you were here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Before we go, I'd like to read a poem because poetry can reach our hearts in a different way. Poems can have us feel in a different way. And that's what this podcast is all about, expanding our hearts, deepening our empathy, and inviting in joy. So each week, you get a new poem. I had a hard time picking a poem for Clarkeisha's episode. Clarkeisha is such a bringer of chaos, a disruptor. Oh, inspiring. So I ended up choosing a poem called Daphne's Broken Sonnet, which is by Iris Jamal Dunkel, because I find it challenging in a good way, in a provocative way. And there's a deep truth that moves me so deeply in the last line of the poem. So here it is, Daphne's Broken Sonnet. Apples are imagining themselves into hillsides. Pink petals stick out their tongues from the dark mouths of branches, and the forest canopy ripens overnight until it pulses like a green heart. Spring Frankensteins us all, softens our cyborg brains. Admit it, you were thinking about what mysteries your phone will sing out, while your body turns like a tree towards the light. Reader, some days it's just too much. Powder blue sky, light wind stirring the leaves as if they're waving, no, beckoning me to root and join in. How could I not give in? Trying to find the song that's buried in the soil. Thank you for joining me today. My hope is that you're feeling a little less alone and a little more seen. So until the next episode, you can find me on Instagram at fatjoy.life, on YouTube at youtube.com/@fatjoy, and on Patreon at patreon.com/fatjoy. Please do check out the show notes for how you can connect with my amazing guest and for the links to the poem. All right, lovely. I am sending you off with my best wishes for an abundantly Fat Joy day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.